Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about portrait photography and why I think that getting great photographs of people has very little to do with how fancy your camera is. Let's get to it. A successful portrait, in my eyes, is a portrait that tells a story. It doesn't always have to be a happy story, a beautiful story, it just is kind of a story. So if it's a portrait that is engaging, it's making you as a viewer feel something or remember somebody from the past or touch you in a certain way, that to me is success. The kind of portraits that we're talking about today are creative portraits. So if I go deep into something that doesn't sound right when it comes to photographing headshots or anything that is a bit more on the professional corporate side, that's not exactly the point today. The point is talking about creative portraiture and how to take photographs of people that tell stories. One of the things that I absolutely love in portraiture is the photographer-subject relationship. And remember that your relationship with your subject starts way before the photo shoot. Building trust in advance with your subject, believe it or not, is going to affect the way the portraits turn out. When you get to the point where you actually photograph that person, you need to make sure that there's already some level of trust between the two of you. And that happens during communication stage, concept building, and all the pre-production stages before you start photographing your subject. The very first thing that you need to think about is how to physically make your subject comfortable. So, for example, if you're shooting in a space that is too hot or too cold, your subject may not be comfortable, and that's going to reflect in the way they behave and eventually what they give to the camera and to you as a photographer. Don't jump right into shooting. Before I start shooting, I make sure that I have a solid 5 to 10 minute conversation with the person I'm going to photograph, and that conversation has nothing to do with photography. I'm just putting everything aside and making sure that I can connect with that person just as a person and not as somebody I'm going to photograph in a few minutes. Another huge part of taking photographs of people is thinking about the environment. What kind of environment are you in? How is it going to help you when it comes to photographing this specific subject, and all the things that you can do to craft an environment that will allow you to get those portraits that you're after. One of the things that I see all the time is people photographing in absolute silence. Well, if that's the kind of thing that you're into, it's totally fine. But in my personal experience and opinion, things always go way better when there's music in the background, and especially music that your subject can relate to and help them open up to you. So how do I choose that kind of music? Easy. I ask the people what kind of music they want to listen to. There are a few reasons why I think that's a good way to go about that. One of them being, of course, it's an icebreaker, it's a conversation piece, and you can start communicating with your subject and especially talking about something that they love. And lastly, I love learning about new music, and I find that's a great way for me to do that. Just ask somebody I just met what they're into, check it out after, and hopefully like it. Now, while technicality is a very important aspect of portraiture and photography in general, I would like to argue that it has its place in portrait photography and photographing people, but it shouldn't be the main focus. I'm not saying that the technicality of photography is not important when photographing people, but it's something that you need to know and just use as much as you need to, but still leave a certain amount of freedom to experiment, make mistakes, think outside of the box, and just break some of those rules so you can get photographs that are just, I don't know if I want to call them accidents, but maybe they're not necessarily 100% planned. Maybe you can surprise yourself with some of the images that you can get. If you ask me if I would like to see a perfectly executed, from a technical point of view, portrait as opposed to a portrait that makes me feel something but maybe is not as technically well executed, I would probably most likely lean towards a photograph that makes me feel something, evokes emotion, even if it's not absolutely perfect. Perfect is boring. So what are some of the things that you as a photographer can do to make your subject open up to you? Show interest in them. Ask them questions. Just be nice. Stay away from generic questions just to make conversation. People can smell that from a mile away. Listen to what they have to say. Ask them what they love to do. Crack a joke? Not a dad joke. Just be yourself, if you're nice. If not, just think about a nice friend you have and try to be like them. Seriously though, just be yourself. People really appreciate that, and you coming out as a genuine person is going to help you build that trust during the shoot. Talk about the weather. Talk about politics. Talk about COVID. Before we move on, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot with pushing this channel forward and pumping out more fresh photo content for you. When your subject arrives at the space, make sure that you don't fiddle too much with your camera, with your lighting, with your backdrop. Make sure that you show your subject that they are the main focus. Be confident, even though things may not always go smoothly. Put a poker face on and plow through it. Don't do it. There are different ways to maintain that communication and connection with your subject while you're photographing them. A great way to do that is shooting from your hip. What it basically means is that instead of shooting like this, you can take your camera away from your face and down to your hip waist level, and you can use your screen and shoot from the hip with looking at the screen. And this basically means that you're taking this device that is blocking currently your eye contact with your subject, and you remove that. So you bring back that eye contact, having your camera at your waist level, and you can communicate with your subject while photographing them. If you do that, just make sure that they know that they need to look at the camera as opposed to at you. Another great way to maintain that connection with your subject is simply putting your camera on a tripod and using a long shutter release cable. By doing that, you basically allow yourself to move around the camera and take photos while you engage with your subject. Depending on where you stand and where the subject is looking, you can create portraits that are much more candid and much more organic and natural looking. Don't bury your face behind the camera for an extended amount of time. Take your camera down, check in with them, show them a couple photos if you'd like, get them excited, get them engaged, and get back into shooting. We talked a lot about making your subject feel comfortable today, but what happens when you want to get a portrait of somebody when they're uncomfortable, or maybe you want to make them uncomfortable so you can get that kind of shot out of them? Of course, the point of this video today is not about how to make your subject comfortable so you can take a photo of them when they're smiling and happy. It's about how to get unique portraiture work that tells a story and shows personalities. This approach really reminds me of one of my favorite photographs ever by Richard Avedon. It's called The Duke and Duchess of Windsor, and it was taken in 1957 or 8, I believe. And the story goes like that. Richard Avedon was scheduled to photograph the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. He knew in advance that They do their own thing in front of the camera. They're very well trained. It's always the same smile, and it's always the same kind of portrait that he ended up seeing out of them. And he thought, this is not for me, I'm gonna do it differently. He arrived at the shoot, at the location, the hotel room, and as they're sitting in front of his camera, he told them the story of how on his way there, his taxi driver hit and killed a dog. Now that obviously was a lie, but he told him that knowing in advance that they have a soft spot for dogs. As soon as he got that reaction out of them, when he told them the story, that's when he clicked the shutter, and that's the photo that he got. If your intention is good, I do believe that it's always good to push the boundaries and try taking risks like that in portraiture. If you're a good communicator, you can always talk your way out of the situation and change the energy again back to what you want it to be. There's always the famous story of Yusuf Karsh's portrait of Winston Churchill. While Karsh was taking photos of Churchill, the Prime Minister refused to take his cigar out of his mouth. So what does Karsh do? He walks over to the Prime Minister, yanks his cigar out of his mouth, goes back behind his camera, and takes the shot. Now, of course, these guys had their reputation behind them to try to pull something like that off, but still, even at their level, it's a huge risk to be doing something like that. So making your subject comfortable is clearly not the only way to get great portraits out of people. For me personally, when I photograph people, I always like to take a portion of the shoot and dedicate it to trying something that may be a total bust. It may not work, and I talk to the subject about it. I say, hey, let's try this crazy thing that is 90% not going to work, but if it does work, it's going to be incredible. And believe it or not, people always go for it because the idea of doing something different excites us. We don't want to be like our neighbor. We don't want to be like our best friend. We don't want to get the same photos that our coworker got. We want to be ourselves. We want something different. When the shoot is over and everything is wrapped up, remember that the job is not done yet. You have to make sure that you give the same kind of care and level of attention to your subject, who is your client, after the shoot. So when it comes to delivery, retouching, PR, and everything that has to do with post-production, you have to make sure that you keep it on the same level of professionalism and the same high standards that you offered before and during the shoot. You can be an incredible photographer, but if the experience that you provide to your subjects is poor, you're missing on a huge opportunity to grow as a creative. That's it for today, guys. Thanks so much for joining. I hope you took a lot out of today's video and are already thinking a bit differently about portrait photography. If you have any questions, comments, or anything you want to say, please hit me in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time.